Good day. This is the last in a series of 8 sessions on working capital and current asset management, and in this session we deal with the cash management specifically. So in the previous sessions we dealt with credit, and in this session we finish with cash management and how important cash management is and how we can manage that. The objective of cash management is to make sure that we've got an optimal level of cash available in the company. On the one side, the requirement is to have sufficient cash available to service the operations and to ensure that operations are not jeopardized. On the other side, excessive balances cost money and it's a loss in profits, and therefore the cash balances should not be too high. It also impacts on the current ratio. Why are the cash being held in a company? And from economics study, you should remember that there were 3 motives on holding cash. The first one is a transaction motive, that is a liquid motive, and that is in terms of the regular operations, the commitments, the monthly rental that needs to be paid, insurance, and all these transactions that need to be paid. So that's a liquidity motive. The others are a reserves motive, precautionary motive. The first one is to make provision for uncertainties, and there it is often advised to have about 3 months of operational cash available in the business, or access to operational cash. And these are often made available through overdraft facilities instead of holding cash, because the returns on cash investments are fairly low, but overdraft facilities cost very little if they're not used, and therefore an optimal way of doing making provision for the precautionary motive. And then the speculative motive is when there are opportunities to maybe buy some bulk. The supplier has got bulk discounts and special offers on available, and that could lead to some opportunities that could either be lost if there are no cash available, or alternatively that can be utilized. The tools in terms of cash management, there's 3 basic tools discussed in this session. First one is cash budgets, then the Baumol model and the Miller-Orr model. So we start off with the cash budgets, and the cash budget is different from a normal budget. A normal budget deals with what are the incomes and the expenses of a business, but a cash budget deals specifically with the timing of the cash flows. So when does the inflows come in, specific dates, and then also when are the commitments to be paid. And this could lead to either or it could prevent liquidity problems, and it can also predict surplus cash, and that surplus cash needs to be dealt with, and we'll get back to that opportunities a little later on. Okay, so the Baumol model is focusing on treating cash almost like as inventory. So there's an amount of cash required, and they apply the economic ordering quantity formula to cash. So it's basically using the economic ordering quantity formula and applying that to cash, and to see what the economic quantities of cash is that we need in a business. The Miller-Orr model, on the other side, deals with or brings into consideration a little bit of the risk in the model, and it looks at the fluctuation between the maximum level and the lower or lowest level, and analyzing how the cash fluctuation takes place inside that band of maximum level and minimum level, and then it calculates a return point. And there's an indicator or a link to a video that discusses specifically how this calculation is taking place. The last element to this is in terms of the cash surplus investments. Where do we invest and how do we invest? Factors that we need to consider are liquidity. In other words, is there access to these investments and how quickly can they turn into cash again? The profitability, the impact on profitability. If surplus cash sits unutilized and unproductive. Also a decision between fixed and floating rates, and depending on the trend in the markets and especially in the interest rates, an informed decision needs to be taken. But very often there's a marginal difference between the fixed and the floating rates, and fixed rates are often a little bit more expensive if we are borrowing, but in terms of the investment, taking up a fixed interest will often give you a minimum term that you are locked in, and that's not so advisable in terms of liquidity. And also the term to maturity. Are there terms to maturity? How long is the minimum term without penalties? Because liquidity, when liquidity is required, it's often on a very short notice, and then penalties are incurred. Short-term investments that could be considered. First one is short-term deposits, money market accounts, call accounts, and the return on these are very low, even overnight deposits. And sometimes the question is being asked, well, but all the administrative issues to get into an overnight account. But remember, if a company makes use of an overnight account, let's say especially the bigger companies with R1 million for 10 days, and they do that consistently throughout the year, then it's 10 days times 12 months. That's 120 days. It's a number of months at an interest rate, and that makes an impact in terms of the return on that surplus cash again. Then short-term and long-term debt instruments, bonds, for instance. These instruments are often traded on the open markets, and therefore access to these instruments and also exiting from these instruments is fairly easy. And then the last one is shares in listed companies. That is a higher return option often, but the risk is there that if the market there's a sudden change in the market, or the timing that the cash is required is not conducive in terms of the timing of the market specifically, then there might be some capital losses because of the urgency of obtaining that cash again. So that brings us to the end of the series on accounts receivable managed, and we thank you for your participation and your attention, and we trust that you found some value in these sessions.